According to Cheryl Hamilton's textbook, The Art of Public Speaking, she stated that one of the number one fears individuals have is that of public speaking. Yes, I get a little anxious whenever I have to give a presentation, but once I get up here, there's this rush of adrenaline, and I realize that truly I have the gift of public speaking. So, whatever job I decided to go into, I wanted to use my gift. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ray, and I'm here to tell you how I went about getting a degree in speech communication. And I would do so in 3 points. Point number 1, why? Point number 2, how, which will be the education. And then point number 3, the actual job, me being here at Lee College. Now, my executive summary, ultimately after I got my master's, my goal was to get a job here at Lee College teaching speech communication classes, which I have achieved because I have been here for 20 years. Before I go on to my body, does anybody have a question? Anybody have a question? Okay, if you have a question going forward, feel free to raise your hand and I will address your question. That said, it brings me to my first point, why I decided to go into speech communication. My mom. You might have heard me talk about her in the past, but my mom and I were very close. God rest her soul. She passed away in 2018. But growing up, it was just my mom and I. She said because it was just us two, she never did the baby talk. She never did the gaga goo goo. She spoke to me like an adult. And as a result, I mimicked her and I started speaking like an adult. John Smith article, How to Get Your Child to Speak at a Young Age, stated, don't speak to them like an adult. Don't speak to them like a child, the gaga goo goo, because then they'll mimic you. Speak to them like a grown up and they will mimic you, which is exactly what I did. My mom told me a story, several stories. We would be at a restaurant and I would just walk around going to tables, randomly talking to people about my favorite team because we grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which consisted of the Minnesota Vikings. And she would come and try to pull me away, but people would say, no, your child is so delightful. I love the way he talks. I just love hearing him speak. But the one thing that led me to believe that I had the gift of public speaking was when I went in front of the Sergeant E5 board when I was in the United States Army. It's a very stressful verbal test that asks you several things such as specialist, right face, left face, what are the 3 settings on the M16. The highest score you could make was a 200. If a soldier in my unit came back with a 170, 175, he or she was doing an outstanding job. Out of a possible 200, I got 199. The sergeant major, who is the highest non-commissioned officer on that particular base, basically told my first sergeant, which was the highest non-commissioned officer with my unit, to do whatever you have to do to make soon-to-be Sergeant Whitlow stay in the United States Army. So I realized if I had the ability to impress a bunch of hardened non-commissioned officers with my speaking ability, indeed, I had the gift of public speaking. So before I move on to my next point, does someone have a question about why I decided to go into speech communication? Need at least one question.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
So for your job, did you ever do another job that was based with your speech communication besides teaching? Did you have a job that utilized your speech?
So in all jobs, to answer your question, yes. In all jobs, you have to be effectively communicating. Prior to me working here, I worked for a pharmaceutical company. I bought blood coagulation. I actually gave a seminar to help individuals speak more properly because I had just completed my degree in speech at that time. But more importantly, I just used my communication skills to communicate with my colleagues.
Okay.
A very good question.
And do you still do seminars and things like that? Is that something you're still doing?
That is a very good question. And the answer is yes, I do go out to the public, usually at my church, or if somebody asks me, hey, can you help me because I have a presentation, I will go out and I basically do what I can to help them be effective public speakers. So yes, I still do that. That's a very good question. Anybody else have any questions?
What is your favorite part about being a speech teacher?
My favorite part is when people come into the class, they're terrified of public speaking, but after that first presentation, it's just a speech. They go, yeah, it's really not that bad. And then just the light bulb goes on whenever I go over the organization, the intro, the body, and the conclusion. That helps alleviates the fear a little bit more. And I just like people becoming better communicators and, more importantly, individuals, because they can communicate more effectively. Okay. Very good questions. I'm now going to move on to my second point, the education that I needed in order to get a master's degree in speech communication. So I had to have a master's degree, which I do. I have a master's degree from the University of Houston in speech communication. I've taken many classes, but one of my favorite classes consisted of persuasion. That's where we went over the elements of a speech. According to Aristotle's book, The Art of Persuasion, he said there are basically three concepts as it relates to speech communication. Ethos consists of the credibility or the trustworthiness of a speaker, meaning in order for the audience to believe you, they have to trust you. And you can do simple things such as show your hands, have eye contact, prepare. If the audience determines that you did not prepare for your presentation, they won't trust you. So preparing as best you can is very important in terms of establishing credibility. Another concept, according to the book by Charles Freedom, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, he talked about logos, logical discourse. It has to make sense. It has to flow. That's why you have your introduction, your body conclusion. But more importantly, you have to back up what you say with facts. That's why I cite sources within the speech, because individuals know that I did my research to give them the information that I am communicating to them. The one element that I think that I use most effectively is that of pathos, and that consists of emotional appeals, meaning when you speak, you have to literally tug at the heartstrings of the audience. And so this is just a sample of a motivational speech, which I will give in its entirety a little bit later on in the semester. It goes something like this. I would rather be dead with my loved ones weeping over my lifeless body, but reminiscing when I was alive, I stood for honor, truth, and justice. That is a more preferred fate than to be alive and have my hands soiled with the blood of innocent men, women, and children, because I chose to shed it for my own selfish gain. I do believe that I use pathos quite effectively, and it makes me an excellent public speaker. Before I move on to my third point, are there any questions? Any questions?
Were there any other classes that you felt really influenced your ability to teach public speaking?
Yes, that is a very good question. Two classes. One, theater. I took theater because I thought it would help me in my pathos. I figured that at times I would have to not act in a way that I'm trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but I had to put on a different persona. So when I took a theater class, I did quite well. I did this skit called The Lonely Soldier, and I basically acted out a soldier that had been through the Vietnam War and had gone through PTSD. That skit went so well that the acting instructor said, you should try out for an open call because I think you would be an excellent actor. Another class, strangely enough, that I took that helped me, still helps me today, is a music class about the crescendos and the decrescendos and just the way it flows. Whenever I listen to a song, I have this ability to take that song and make a presentation along the same melody, or the presentation will make people feel the same way that the song makes me feel. So 2 classes, acting and music. That was an excellent question.
It's really interesting that they're both in the arts, because speech is kind of, it's a different skill. It's pretty artistic.
Yes, very good question, because in the olden days, or very good observation, in the olden days, speech and theater were housed in the same area. It's split a little bit more now, but there are a lot of individuals that in fact, God rest his soul, Dan Mendoza, he was an instructor that taught here for 40 some odd years. He had like a theater and speech degree. All right, very good questions. I will now move on to my third and final point, my job here at Lee College. Now, I basically have 2 jobs. First and foremost, I am a faculty member. According to the Lee College Handbook, in order to be considered a full-time faculty member, at least on the academic side, you have to have a master's degree and 18 graduate hours in the discipline that you want to teach. So I have a master's degree in speech communication. That consists of 30 hours. And so of those 30 hours, matter of fact, all of those hours consist of speech. However, if I wanted to teach history, I don't have to go back and get a history degree. I just have to go and take 18 graduate hours in history. then I can teach a history class. Same thing if I wanted to teach Spanish. I'd have to take 18 graduate hours in Spanish. If I wanted to teach government, 18 graduate hours in government. So I'm a full-time faculty member first and foremost. According to the Lee College pay scale, the average salary of a full-time faculty member on the academic side with 0 to 5 years experience consists anywhere between $55,000 and $65,000. However, here at Lee College, we get paid based on years of service, and so the longer you've worked, the more money you make. I've been here for 20 years, and when you add the summer, and then when you add the holiday classes and the mini classes, you can make anywhere from 70 to 100 grand. So I do believe the salary is quite appealing considering I'm doing a job that I actually love. Now, I'm also the chair of the department. This is a little bit different. According to the Chair Academy, different schools select their department chairs in a different way. Here at Lee College, it's based on a nomination process. So somebody within the department nominates you to be the chair. You can nominate yourself if you so choose. Then the nominations are tallied and HR sends the individuals that have been nominated sort of a congratulatory note. Congratulations, you have been nominated. Do you accept the nomination? If you don't, then your name is removed. If you do, then it's a quasi vote, meaning individuals are nominated and then other individuals within the department recommend or vote for the individuals that have been nominated. Now, based on that, you have to go through an interview process with the Vice President of Academic Affairs and the Provost. After that, the Vice President and the Provost make a recommendation to the President, and the President ratifies that recommendation. So ultimately, the President of the college has the final say. We just went through a round of chair selection, and I'm very honored that I was selected once again to serve as chair for the Speech Communication, Language, and Teacher Education Department for 3 years. Any questions on, yes.
In your experience, what was the most challenging part of your graduate program?
The most challenging part for me was getting in. I did not do well on those standardized tests. The GRE, I did not do well. Because I had good grades and I wrote a letter and I had a couple of recommendations, I was accepted as a sort of I forgot the exact term, but it's like on a provisional or probational student, meaning if my grades were sufficient, I could be granted full-time admission. And so I had no problem with the grades. I knew once I got in, I would be able to be granted full-time. So the hardest part for me was getting in.
Did you take any, like teaching courses or anything like that, or?
Teaching courses to help me teach here. That is another very good question. The answer is no. And it was kind of shocking because I first came to Lee College as an adjunct. It was like in 1995. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And somebody said, well, why don't you teach? And I kind of felt that I had the gift of teaching, but I had no experience teaching at all. So I called the college and I asked them, do you have any part-time public speaking instructor positions? And they said, yes, can you come down? It was like on a Friday morning. And so before my regular job, I got here and I met with some individuals and they go, you're hired, because it was right before the semester started and they needed instructors. And I kind of went, I'm hired. Don't you want to ask me some more questions? And so they literally gave me the book and I went to my public speaking instructor and a mentor of mine, the individual that chaired my thesis. And I go, what do I do? You're in college now. You do what you want to do. You're an excellent public speaker. You can take the syllabus that you use in your public speaking class here at University of Houston and modify it, and that is exactly what I did. So I had no teaching experience until I stepped foot on this campus as an adjunct instructor in 1995. Then, once I got here, there's some professional development, and I just got better at it as I continued teaching. A very good question. Yes?
Wait, so you said that you got the job here while you were still in college?
I got a part-time job, so I wasn't a full-time faculty member. An adjunct professor is just basically a part-time professor. They just teach one class.
Oh, okay.
And so I was working full time and I taught a night class. It was like a Monday, Wednesday night. And once I taught that night class, I realized this is what I wanted to do. And it took me about 5 years to ultimately get the full-time job here. But I taught as an adjunct instructor here at Lee College, and then I taught 2 courses at the University of Houston. In fact, the courses that I taught at University of Houston downtown, business and professional communication, this very class right here. More questions?
Were you an undergrad when you got hired?
No, you still have to have a master's degree. You still have to have a master's degree. More questions?
The other job that you worked at while you were part-time, was it a job that applied toward being a speech teacher? Or was it just
Nothing. It was just a job. I graduated. I got my undergraduate degree, and I needed a job, like a whole bunch of people do. I just hired me. Just hired me. I needed a job, and then while I was working that job, I continued to work on my master's degree, and eventually I finished it. And I was asking myself what I want to do. They wanted me to be like a branch manager in Chicago and New York, but I didn't want to do that. I just realized I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go that route. And then the job, it got sold. That particular company got sold, and so they were laying people off. And I had to get another job selling computer resistors. Had nothing to do, but again, I needed a job. I had a master's, I needed a job. That job was laying off people. I hated that job. And I said, I will volunteer to be laid off and take my chances at a community college. And I applied here and I got it. So the jobs that I had before this had nothing to do. They were all in the business industry. And I think somebody talked about, I did apply to the FBI. I got deep into the process, but I decided I don't want to go that route because the FBI called me and said, we want to send you to Kansas City for the interview process. You have to commit to going to Quantico a month after that interview process if you do well. And I thought, I just don't know if I want to do that. I deferred my application and ultimately I just let it lapse. I just didn't want to go that route. My recommendation to you is to search your heart and find your passion and work towards getting that job. Because if you have a job that you hate going to every single morning, it's going to make life difficult for you and your family. Before I move to my conclusion, are there any other questions? In conclusion, I told you about my endeavors to get a degree or to get a job here at Lee College in speech communication. I talked about why I decided to go into that job. Ultimately, my mom talking to me as an adult and not as a little baby, and making 199 on my E5 board exam. Point number 2, the education. I talked to you about some classes or a class that I've taken as it pertains to speech communication. The Art of Rhetoric, Aristotle's Pathos. I do believe I use the emotional appeal quite effectively, which makes me a great public speaker. And then point number 3, my job here at Lee College as a faculty member and a department chair. And once again, I just want to express upon you, whatever job you do, make certain that it's a passion and go for it despite what anybody says. Before I end, are there any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time.